Hello, everybody. Just gonna double check that we're recording. We are. It's your boy, Sil the DM, bringing you a recap for this week, the 4th of November, 2019. The Ixalan campaign, which is spelled incorrectly. Let me just fix that, because your boy didn't edit his script. Um, Taking up where we left off. Oh, sorry. The title for this session I decided, which I decide after the sessions, when I'm making the script, is Pleasant Dreams. Taking up where we left off, the group continued rowing on past the influence of the powerful Verdant Sun's avatar that they had seen in the last session. Mikhail, the NPC who had been moved to tears by the dinosaur's presence, taking the time to recoup some of his will. Again, the avatars of the sun, those five dinosaurs, are sort of revered as like near deities, demigods within the Empire, and Mikhail being an ex-soldier, this was a religious experience for him. After which the group rode on for a bit, with a comedic exchange learning that Bardov, the orc oarsman, seemed to not be able to swim. In response to being called out for being a pirate who couldn't swim, the large orc firmly stated that it's not a problem as long as he stays on the ship. So, of course, like Chekhov's gun, this rapidly becomes a problem. The three small boats became beset by a flurry of wasp swarms. As the crew rallied to fight back, Shura revealed a new power, releasing crackling eldritch blasts of dark black mana, wrapped in blue and highlighted by magenta lightning into the swarms. Osaha managed to dodge a fierce strike of the swarm, but poor Bardov was getting hit for over 12 damage a round, though he was managing to damage the swarm with the flat side of his axe. The real start of the real star, delete, of the left ship was the Goblin. I don't know why it auto gobbling. I don't know why. Oh, it's because I put two B's. Goblin. That's. Sorry, Famine. I don't know why it called you gobbling, but you know. When you're gonna get called out by a word processor, you might as well get called out in a funny way. Famine, who now using meta magic, was shooting off quickened magic missiles and firebolts, easily blowing apart both of the swarms on her ship. Like, masterfully. Like, she was just blowing shit up. Federico and Aleshta were helping. Osaha not you was using his new bardic abilities, invigorating performance, to allow the spellcasters Famine and Shura to take additional attacks. Um, the bardic subclass that Osaha is playing is a homebrew, which I will discuss later, but it's based quite heavily off of the Dancer class from Fire Emblem, so it allows Osaha to expend their action and use their bardic inspiration to give an ally a use of an action on his turn. Basically acting like a warlord from D&D 4th edition, replacing Osaha's own attack with the attack of an ally, allowing Famine to start ripping off multiple firebolts around, really eating into the wasps. Osaha, though, seeing the trouble on the other ship after helping Famine, dove into the water in order to cross the 15-foot distance. And the swarm in the back of the ship had moved, as Mikhail had disengaged from it, moved towards Pelennor, who in the first round had sort of just curled up trying to avoid the swarm. And over the course of 2 rounds ended up taking over 20 damage. During the commotion, Bardov slipped with a natural 1 on his attack and fell into the water, which was a bit deeper than he was tall. The water at this point was about 7.5 feet deep. And Bardov, though quite thick, is only about 6'5". So Osa, who's taller than the river, merfolk in the Ixalan campaign setting are quite tall. Shura being the tallest member of the party, I believe it's 7'9". He was trying to help Bardov as he was flailing to keep his head above water, and ended up taking a backhand to the face. And eventually, in panic, he sunk his axe into the boat. and did eventually manage to pull it himself up into the boat using the axe as like an arm hold. Um, Shura, at that same time, was managing to destroy the swarm that had been attacking Bardov with a fierce eldritch blast. Alani and Famine, after Alani had been honestly, and with Osa's help, spent several rounds pouring healing words into Bardov in between their attacks, together, with a max damage toll of the dead and Fire Blast, blow away the last of the swarm. Orson and Ernesto had managed to handle the first one that Shura had devastated with his Eldritch Blasts, with Orson managing to deliver a mighty critical hit. Now, Orson isn't really that much of a combatant. In fact, I believe Orson is the apprentice of Kasim, the ship's scribe and the captain's son. Um, so Orson, not known among the crew as being much of a fighter, uh, but he managed to score a critical hit on the swarm and devastate the last of them. Uh, Alani ended up getting a little flustered as Bardov tried to thank him for all the help and healing, suggesting that the boats move on while getting teased by his brother. Alani then took the time to cast a prayer of healing over his censer, aiding the recovery of those hurt on all three boats. Pelennor and Bardov definitely took the worst of it, but Mikhail and Federico also received a fair bit of damage from their swarms. While rowing along, after several hours more rowing, moving into different territory, we basically roll on a set of random charts I devised once every 2 hours worth of rowing, as they managed to cover a fair bit of ground in that time in the rowboats. While rowing, there came the low thuds of heavy footfalls, the creaking of trees, and the cries of fleeing birds like they had experienced on the other island. Trying to push on and hard as fast as they could, Ernesto, in the boat with Orson and Shura, was struggling, his arms seizing as he, in panic, tried to get them away. Mikhail and Federico overtook them, with Shura's boat normally leading the three, just as the colossal dreadmob breached the trees at the edge of the water, catching, catching on a potential snack. Pelennor, in what they will defend to the death as being a good move, flew up to the dinosaur, casting Speak with Animals on themselves, also having tried this earlier with the swarms, and endeavored for the Dreadmaw to leave them alone, explaining that they would barely be a snack to the beast, and that it wasn't worth the energy. They did not roll well on their persuasion check, however. Ended up taking a small amount of sonic damage and being deafened by the creature's roar. Peli was reeling as it went to attack her. Shura, however, had prepared an eldritch blast, and with a called shot to the eye and a critical hit, blasted the creature with a fierce blow, exploding its left eye with eldritch energy. Using the momentum gained by blinding the dinosaur in an eye, the group sped on, Osa climbing back into the boat, as he had dived into the water to try and pull Shura's ship when they started to lag behind, and Pelennor flew back as fast as they could. Exhausted and spent, the crew pulled their rowboats to the shore to set up camp for the night, though not before catching a sight of the belligerent down the river ahead of them, a large ship that is famously piloted by a foreigner to the realm, Vraska. Vriska? Vraska. No, Vriska's Homestuck. Vraska. Um, the Gorgon. And at this point, all of the NPCs who were involved with the rowing, so at this point, Alesta, Ernesto, Orson, Bardov, and Mikhail were all exhausted. Only Federico, out of the NPCs, was still, like, up and ready to go. Um, so, yeah, they definitely had to call it for the night. During the night, on first watch, Alani, managing to find the moon for the first time in nights, was busy praying, and though his crying at the stress of the recent journey ended up waking Bardov, the orc ex-slave, who again bears a very similar brand to Alani, though his takes up all of his broad back. They shared a bit of a tender moment with Bardov, wiping away the smaller man's tears and kissing the back of his hand before, in embarrassment, Alani encouraged him to go back to sleep. After a quiet first watch, Pellinor woke up Famine to take over the second watch, which, mostly because Famine's player was in the hospital with tonsil issues, passed without issues. When she went to wake Osaha and Shura for their watch, she found that in his sleep Osaha had crawled up close to Shura and was under his jacket, a large duster he wore that covered almost all of his body. Upon waking the bard, Famine scuttled off to pretend to sleep. At this point, Osa was having trouble waking Shura, which was odd, as the rogue always snapped awake any time anyone approached him normally. Finally, resorting to sending a message whispered directly into his brain to snap him out of a nightmare, for his head felt hot and he was covered in sweat. As he woke, there was a triangle-shaped flash of orange in his eye. For just the briefest moment, that Osaha saw a flash of weird light in his normally very cotton candy pink eye. But awake, he sighed in relief that in the ending of the nightmare, that the nightmare had ended, though he seemed to think he was still dreaming, for when Osaha went to playfully kiss him on the cheek and tell him to rest, that he would take over the watch, Shura went a bit more intimate. And though Osaha was aware that Shura felt he was still dreaming, less cool thoughts prevailed, and so much to Famine's delight, she got to witness the two of them enjoying a rather carnal moment with each other, though fairly quiet thanks to some bleeding lips and bruised necks. Um, when it was all finished, however, Osa realized that Shura felt he was still dreaming as he drifted off, and panicked quite a bit, and after very quickly cleaning both of them up, woke the rogue and awkwardly revealed that it wasn't a dream, to which Shura went quite quiet. The two sat almost back to back watching the camp in a bit of an awkward silence, though Shura eventually held onto Osaha's hand through the night. Waking the others, don't know why that's in all capitals, up after suffering some intense teasing from uh, the brothers. Osaha and Alani were in peak form of teasing that morning. They set off again and ended up passing by a small fort, a foothold of the Legion on the continent proper that was lit with dull embers from a lightning bolt that had struck it in the night. There had clearly been a fairly sizable fire that had burned down to just smoldering embers. This fortress, however, wasn't nearly as ancient as the one they had passed two islands, or on the previous island, the one that had caused Alani and Bardov some issues. Um, it didn't bear a lot of the normal iconography of a Legion fortress. However, as they were rowing against the current, it was going much slower, so they decided to just sort of push on, not wanting to get sidetracked. When they were suddenly hit with a fierce windstorm that threatened to rip Shura from his boat and send Sea Swift hurtling into the trees, Mikhail managed to tackle the pterosaur to the boat and protect it with his body, as Pellinor tried but failed and ended up just bonking their head on one of the seats. Bardov also pulled Alani in under himself, keeping the smaller half-orc protected, his larger frame easily able to completely cover the half-orc. The wind kept up fierce for almost 15 minutes, rocking their boats against each other and hurtling them down the current. Finally, when it let up, they were back by the fortress that was now engulfed in flames, its embers that had burned low reinvigorated by the strong wind. Sighing that they needed to make up the 2 hours of ground, they pushed on, and when they were getting back to around the same point where the storm started, Mikhail spotted movement through the trees, and had Pellinor jump cautiously to take a look using her wings, seeing a troop of no less than 30 Legion conquistadors, vampires, with 20 of their number carrying a massive tarp-covered box that looked almost like a small home or a battering ram. The crew, at Shura's command, made for the beach on the opposite side of the river, and quickly began to hide, Shura trying to erase the evidence that they had dragged the boats ashore, while the group, though Famine and Bardov were proving terrible at it, attempted to hide. Alani assisting Bardov by just pushing and piling mud up against his back. Um, a minute later, and the troop was marching past. A few close to the river, keeping a cautious eye out for trouble. But after 10 minutes, they were out of sight. Uh, but Shura did not give the order to move yet. And just as he was about to, another 4 minutes later, they heard a twig snap and looked across the river to see a beautiful, ethereal, almost looking woman with. I don't know why I didn't write the word woman there. Woman with grayish pale skin, luscious curls of thick platinum blonde that fell down to the small of her back, and eyes of liquid gold. Her Legion armor was a higher quality than the other soldiers, a breastplate of some sort, with a fine metallic sheen. It had the symbol of a black, horned and fanged helmet on a yellow field. She didn't appear to see the crew, but as she went to leave, she attempted to cast a spell, something similar to Dimension Door, and instead of the spell resolving, there was a fierce flashback, a feedback, and a font of arcane energy was pulled from the spell to Shura, igniting the merfolk in a dull orange glow. At which point, Pelennor and Osaha both released prepared actions. Osaha hurling a sleep spell across the river, which didn't seem to affect the vampire, and Pelennor releasing an arrow from her bow, which, as it flew across the river, she rolled terribly to hit. And the vampire whipped out this beautifully curved longsword and just cut the arrow in half, midair. And that's where we ended the session. Now, to explain what happened with Shura in very brief details, and I didn't include this in my script. I meant to, but I didn't deal with it. I'm also going to save my changes. Shura, when he leveled up, multi-classed into Warlock. And I'm not going to go into specifics because I think it's really good for that to sort of develop more naturally among the campaign. But the passive that he acquired, one of the two abilities that he acquired with his Warlock Pact, is a ethereal prison, a 120-foot aura around his body at all times, that interacts with teleportation magic specifically. Now, Shura can, as a reaction, choose to take force damage and pull that aura in, suppressing it, to either mask its presence or to let friendlies teleport within its range. However, Shura rolled really poorly on his Arcana check, which is a shame because it's a skill he's good at. But he didn't realize the vampire was casting a teleport spell, so he didn't have a chance to use his reaction. The barrier, the aura works just like that. It's a 120-foot area. If anyone attempts to make a teleport check, they have to make a wisdom saving throw against Shura's spell DC, which at this point is, I think, 14 or 13. Shura's stats really aren't that impressive at all. But charisma is his highest stat, and it has been since his character creation. So he does have a pretty decent Warlock spell DC. I'm pretty sure it's 13 right now. And the vampire has a pretty impressive wisdom save, but she rolled a 5 and wasn't able to complete the teleport. What happens when someone attempts a teleport spell within the ethereal prison and it fails is the magic energy that was being used for the teleport gets siphoned to Shura like a leech, giving him 1d10 temporary hit points for 1 minute. So, yeah, the jig is up, and they're going to be starting a pretty intense fight, hopefully. It's been a bit of a challenge to design this vampire to be a fair enough challenge for what I want her to be against 5 NPCs and 5 PCs and 6 NPCs. We have an 11-man party against 1 vampire. So we needed to do a little tinkering, but we'll see how that goes next time. I opted to stay pretty vague with what happened between Shura and Osa for the sake of YouTube being a bit of a prude towards that sort of thing. But yeah, it was an interesting session, everyone. If you have any comments, questions, or queries, please put them down below. My name is Selenanil. I'm the DM, and I hope you had fun listening to me recap our Ixalan campaign. Pleasant dreams.